absences that I'm
Right.
aware of.
Thanks. Yeah, it remains a stellar committee.
Yep. So on that, we'll kind of move forward here. Since it has been so long, I just wanted to kind of reintroduce myself. I'm Andrew Leeper with ALSC Architects. We have Matthew Kehoe, who was just speaking for the cities of Covington and Maple Valley, representing them tonight. We have Rustin Hall on the phone as well from ALSC Architects. And then Ken Ballard is here as well. And then joining us shortly will also be Kate Roosevelt from our end. And we have Michael in the background here with us from DH. And then if everyone just wants to quickly state their name, just so everyone can get used to the names associated with voices again, that'd be great. And if you want, I can just call people out from the list of attendees to make that quicker. So we'll start with Brock, since you're at the top.
Hello, I'm Brock from Black Diamond.
Linda, you want to go next?
Linda Johnson from Maple Valley.
Thank you. Jim?
Yeah, Jim Scott, past council member from Covington, just outside of Covington.
Marita?
Hi, Marita Ledesma, and also Benedict now, but I'm also in the city of Covington.
And then Chris?
Chris Brestel from Maple Valley.
Jeff Wagner?
Jeff Wagner, Mayor Covington.
And then we have Kate on the call now, and then Christina. Oh, maybe Christina, you're muted, so maybe you're speaking and no one's hearing you. We'll skip over Christina. Mark Persley.
Mark just sent a text that he has no audio.
Oh, okay. Thank you. And then Rosie.
Yep, Rosie Bolins, Maple Valley.
Great. Well, I think that gets us through all of the people. If I missed anyone, chime in and let us know.
Hey, Drew, just before we go on, Michael, is there anything you can do perhaps to help Mark Persley? He's saying he's not getting audio or video.
I'm chatting him right now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Great. So kind of just to go over our mission statement again, it's really the mission of the Covington Maple Valley Aquatics Recreation Center steering committee to ensure that the feasibility study recommendations are based on a thorough and inclusive project or process that reflects the true needs of the citizens and the region. So I know that's what we've been working through this entire time, and just wanted to reiterate that since this will be the last night. So thanks everyone for all of your work and continued efforts in this project. So really tonight, we're going to go through a lot of the funding mechanisms, the campaign planning needs, facility business plan, economic impacts, and the facility cost analysis. And then kind of our final recommendations and how we came to those with the rationale of it. And then kind of identifying the next steps, which were in the report, but we'll go over those in kind of brief coverage as we get further into this. So really, we're still in the early parts of this with the feasibility study, and we'll be moving forward into the next portion of the project following this. Really the next pieces, which we'll go over, take this study over to the city councils for their review and approval and kind of determination of next steps as well. So it's still early, there's plenty of time. Some of the stuff we'll go over tonight is just early thoughts on how we kind of make this work as the project, and then get further input, and then all of that gets relayed out and kind of rehashed through the design process in the future. And that ties into a lot of this funding and capital campaigning piece. So there's a lot of steps still left to go, but we're moving along great here, and kind of got some good momentum going. Hopefully we can keep that going. So some of the stuff too that we wanted to go over, since it has been quite a while since we last met. I know the last virtual public workshop was held back in April, and we've been working on a whole bunch of different pieces of this, namely dealing with the funding pieces of it. But in that time, we were also having Matthew and other city staff outreaching to the public through public events, venues throughout the community. So Matthew, thanks for all of your efforts there. And while that was happening, in tandem, DH was running some targeted Facebook outreach advertisements through June and August. And over that course of those 3 months, we reached a total of 47,000 people plus, almost 47,500 people. And out of those Facebook communications or interactions, about 2,500 people engaged with those posts, so about 5.6. The highest viewed outreach item was the site selection with just over 10,500 people. And then the largest engagement, and probably not surprisingly because of the images, were people looking at the overviews of the spaces and imagery with a 7.8% engagement on that one. And a lot of that is basically people commenting or kind of thumbs up emojis up on the screen. So that's kind of that engagement piece. What was really kind of telling on that was where people came in as far as importance. So there was 34 survey responses that came back from those Facebook posts at the end of each one of them. And out of that, competitive swimming, lap swimming, and learn to swim ranked the highest as percentages of strong needs or a somewhat need within the community out of the swimming portions or aquatics portions of the project. So here's just some of the little snips of Facebook posts that people put up during that outreach effort too. And then the other part of that that came in is strong needs were the gymnasium, basketball, and volleyball court area was another one of really strong needs within the community. And then there are some more snips here. It's all stuff we can get to you if you haven't seen that yet. So Matthew, I'm not sure if that info got forwarded along or not, but all of that was important info there. So that's kind of what we've been doing in the background. And then a lot of this was working on the report and the financial side, as I was telling you about. So I think tonight, the real question is, as a committee member and individual, how can we help you in determining your role moving forward, or help you kind of keep the excitement and engagement of this process going forward? And this is where each of you can chime in as steering committee members if you have questions.
Are you wanting us to identify what we think we should be doing going forward?
Well, and just kind of understanding where you could kind of help input, or if you have questions on how you can help input kind of a urgency or continue the momentum of the project. If you have a question on how you could do that, and if you don't have questions, that's fine.
I think just, you know, if we're kept informed, then we can try to and keep the people informed by, you know, being the relay through Facebook or Instagram or, you know, city council meetings, things like that. You know, we can continue to be that, I guess.
Wanting us to raise our hands to talk or just talk?
I think you can just talk. If there's other people chatting, you want to jump in, maybe then raise your hand. But otherwise, I think
Okay.
there's not that many people speaking right now, Jeff.
So, and going off what Brock said, I see this, I don't really have a question, but I see my role moving forward as a member is to be the cheerleader for this campaign and to keep the excitement going as we go through the design phase, the campaign phase. I mean, I know that not everybody on the steering committee could probably do that, but I definitely do with my family and I will be out there. I mean, I'm not going to be wearing my normal hula skirt and stuff when I do for other events, but I'll be out there to help.
Yeah, and I think that is an important part, Jeff, is just keeping the excitement going and keeping people engaged. Yeah, it'll take a lot of effort from the cities of Covington and Maple Valley and the kind of executive group that continues moving forward, keeping everyone informed of the process. But I'd also say that that's important for you guys to reach out and ask for updates as well.
So I think that forgive me if I'm wrong, but on the survey that you just showed, did we ask at all? I saw there was a question about an arts and crafts room, but and I saw something about a multi-purpose room. Did we specifically ask the community if they wanted like a performance stage or a room for performing arts, where performing arts could take place, or choral groups and that kind of thing? I don't think I saw that on there.
I did not see, we had an arts and crafts room piece,
Yeah.
so that might have gotten missed as far as performing arts. I'd have to dig in more to what we asked, unless Michael knows off the top of his head.
Well, I would just say that I feel like my role individually then moving forward as the chair of the Arts Commission would be to make sure that we keep that element as part of the conversation. It's very much needed. And I'm not saying that we don't need swim, because I know we do. We need the gym and all of that. I want all of that. But an arts and crafts room is completely different than a space for performing arts. And I think if you just say multi-purpose room, that doesn't get people's brains there either. You can't assume that it's going to make that leap. And in fact, I just came from a meeting with Pat Patterson, who's our Parks and Rec city liaison who oversees arts, and one of my arts commissioners who is very, very much into the performing arts. And I just had a whole 30-minute conversation with her about how we need space. And right now, she did some wonderful performing arts things in Covington Community Park this summer, and they were very well attended. But as you know, that's weather dependent. And so it's very, very much needed. And I just hope that moving forward, when we engage the community, we're positioning that properly so that people understand what we're asking them and not just saying arts and crafts room, because that's a completely different type of space.
You know, Drew, I'm gonna weigh in for just a minute, because Marita raises a really important point, and it actually is a follow-up to what Matthew started this conversation with, which is also really critical. This needs to be a living document. This is a point in time that is needed in order to kick us to the next phase. But everyone on this call and on this steering committee certainly has a role to play as an ambassador and to carry this vessel on to these next stages in the best way that they can. And remember that we can continue to perfect this and refine this as we move forward. And if those priorities over time start to shift around, or if there's something that just hasn't been emphasized that all of a sudden is becoming very, very prevalent, well, we're listening. And this is, at the end of the day, this is all about you and your community. And if this point in time after that changes a bit, so be it. This needs to have a pulse that continues on, and all of you can play a really critical role in that. A big part of it, just as Marita has reported out, is just listening to the community. What are you hearing out there? And don't ever say, nope, it's too late. You know, that's not a report, so it's not a project. That is not at all the case.
And actually, just one more comment. This particular commissioner actually brought this project up, and I didn't know that she knew about it. And she brought it up as a possibility, and she was so excited about it. And she said, "Do you know when it's coming?" Because she wanted the space for all of her performing arts. So she, as a performing arts community member, is very excited about it.
Great. Thanks, Marita. Anyone else? If not, we'll jump into the next section here.
Hey, Drew, this is Matt, and I just wanted to further emphasize those great comments that this is a starting point. And I loved the answers you've gotten, but I just wanted to articulate something I heard, which was to keep letting it grow and to not let anyone ever feel excluded or that their possibility, like, I guess I'm back to this is the possibilities. And yes, we refined what's feasible at this time, but it doesn't stop possibilities.
Yeah, and this is, I think, to what Rustin was saying, this is a point in time of measurement, almost a stake in the ground. And I agree entirely, Matthew. And there's plenty of opportunities to keep adding on or manipulating it to make sure that it is the correct program and facility for your communities. So with that, I think we'll jump into the next section here, and we'll get Ken going here on the capital funding sources.
So obviously, one of the issues as we start to look at how do we move this project along is how are we going to fund not only the capital to develop the facility itself, but then also the operation. So as part of this study, we looked at a number of possible funding options. And that included partnerships and a variety of different sources. And I won't go through all of these in great detail, but we also did a partnership analysis that came up with the, who were likely what we call equity partners in the project and who might be able to provide some dollars for that. So some of the possibilities are listed here in terms of partnerships, varying levels of potential capital involvement with that. And generally it depends upon the level of involvement in the project itself. So, partnerships is one source. Fundraising, which Kate will talk about here in a minute, is certainly another option for you as well. And there's numbers of different ways to do that. And she'll go into that in a little more detail as we move forward. And then certainly there's the public funds or tax initiatives and different sources, some of which are realistic and others are not. General fund, that's not really an option unless there's a tax increase to fund it through that source for either one of the two communities right now. In other words, it's not any leftover funding. It would require an additional tax levy or additional source of funds. So then there's other options out there, from capital improvement funds to councilmatic bonds to just a bond measure, park impact fees, other forms of taxation that would be involved with that, and other kind of more creative things like certificates of participation that aren't really a form of actual debt. And then certainly one of the options, and we'll dive into this in more detail, is one of saying, besides just having the cities involved with this, is the establishment of a special district. And there's a number of different options. And as we move through this, it was kind of determined that the most appropriate option for this project would be a Metropolitan Park District, or what basically the acronym being MPD. But there were some other options out there that were looked at as well. Other potential sources could be state legislative funding. That's certainly dependent upon the legislature's willingness to fund these types of projects. It has happened certainly in the area over the last 5 years or so. And then also federal funding. And that's some of that's tied right now to the American Recovery Act and some of the other things that are as well. But those are ones that are out there. So we have the capital side of it, and then go ahead, Drew, and go to the next slide. So then the other side of it is, and we'll talk a bit about the operational obligations that come with the facility, but the notion is that the facility will not be able to cover its cost of operation through what we call earned income, or revenue that's generated by the facility itself. In other words, there's a shortfall. There's a difference between the cost of operation and the revenue potential from everything from user fees and rental fees and program fees and other sources. That won't make up the difference. So we also know we have to fund an operating shortfall every year as well. So Finding a source for that is also important and part of any kind of funding plan. So, the logical things that are in there is depending upon the partner's involvement, they may be involved in trying to fund at least a portion of the operational shortfall. You can have interlocal agreements with other entities that may be involving other communities that aren't part of the MPD or other things that may have some advantages to that. Maybe with school districts, it could be other sources as well that will help to fund that. Sponsorships is a part of that as well. Operational grants or programmatic grants can be, and then even an endowment fund where you're raising dollars to fund really an offload every year of money coming out of the fund that helps pay the endowment. And especially in this day and age where the revenue, or excuse me, the interest that's comes off of those accounts is so low, it takes massive endowment fund just to offload enough yearly revenue just from the interest that's earned to make up much difference. So it's tough right now in this environment to do that. But those are all sources that are out there. And then certainly you have the public funding initiatives, and they're not, much different than what we talked about before, which is involvement by the two cities and sharing with the requirement to fund the shortfall, and that obviously would require also a tax initiative to fund that in some way, shape, or form. And so general tax dollars, unless there's a tax increase to back that up, is not real viable. And then certainly the special district or the MPD option would also, if you set that up as a taxing district, you would fund not only the capital, but the operations shortfall as well through an ongoing operational levy. So those are kind of the summary of kind of the basic sources that are out there. So then we also go ahead, Drew, and go to the next slide. Started to kind of say, all right, so from different sources that are out there, what's kind of realistic in most cases for the ability to fund both capital and operations? So you see some general assessments and kind of ranges of how many dollars we think this project may be able to garner on the capital side. And again, it varies pretty dramatically depending upon the involvement of that. And you can see some things like certainly cities and a special district or an MPD has the ability to fund, major portion, if not almost all of the project. But then we get down to things like grants and foundations and even federal dollars, and it's generally much lower percentages of that. So, the real kind of takeaway on this is in most projects, it requires a heavy load of tax dollars usually to be the ones that support this in most endeavors of this nature. It's backed up by some type of usually a bond measure to fund that either through existing organizations such as the cities or through the establishment of an MPD. So we looked at, we also then kind of handicapped, if you will, the operational aspects as well, saying, okay, what realistically can we get from these same types of sources that would help with the operational shortfall? And you can see there's some, a lot of categories where, yeah, you can generate some income, but it's pretty small. And it really, again, comes down to the fact that in most instances, it is it's the taxing dollars that make up the significant difference in that. Now, even with this, it's not to minimize the importance of diversifying your funding sources for both capital and operations. And it still is critically important to utilize all the different options that may be out there to the best you can on any project. The more you can spread out the funding, the more you can show voters the fact that you're trying to maximize the other opportunities you're there, not being solely reliant on tax dollars for either capital or operations, is still an important message and still worth pursuing, even though the reality may still be that the taxing sources may be the primary source for both capital and operations. So this kind of just gives you some ideas of what's out there in terms of, at least in big picture terms, funding sources and kind of the levels that you might be able to expect from it.
Thanks, Ken. And we'll get to questions towards the end, but if anyone has anything, I think we welcome to answer them as they come up. as well. So on that, Kate, I think we'll jump into your piece on the campaign planning.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good to be with you, and thanks for the time this evening. I think, look, keeping Ken's chart in mind, what I have really tried to address is how, if and how you could put a fundraising campaign together to provide at least some sort of funding for the project, and potentially, create a fundraising program that could continue beyond the funding of the project to support some future state of programming operations, et cetera. So, there's a lot of overlap, I think, just in terms of how we think about grants and foundations and what we mean by a campaign. And I'm trying to be as comprehensive as possible, because a campaign is merely an organizing mechanism for telling a story, engaging people, and asking for gifts, and gifts coming from all sorts of sources: individuals, families, businesses, foundations, even established grant-making programs that are run through the state of Washington and other public entities. So please just keep that in mind as we walk through the next couple of slides. So this is just an introductory slide to share with you how we think about putting campaign strategy together. And we work on all sorts of campaign planning exercises for buildings, for endowments, for program expansion, for new organizations, and sometimes comprehensive campaigns that wrap multiple needs and initiatives together. And, regardless of the type and focus of the campaign, the success of the campaign is really built on four pillars, four key components, and you can see them described here. The first one, of course, is the case for support, or the story and the vision that you're trying to accomplish by creating this new facility, and especially a story that speaks to donors, that will compel and inspire them to part with their assets or share their assets with you. We obviously take a very serious look at donor engagement, both in terms of how donors are engaged, what are the types of activities that are used or should be used to engage donors, and also what is the size and shape of a donor base or a prospect pool that could be, again, engaged in the specific campaign activity. Leadership, as you've already touched on this evening, is perhaps the most important component of a campaign's success, because at the beginning and the end of the day, if you have a cohort of excited, willing, visible champions who are able to connect with other leaders in the community, share the story, and generate excitement, that actually goes a long way toward overcoming shortcomings and perhaps obstacles in some of these other areas. So it really does matter who is leading the effort. And I think in this case, as you all have noted and certainly demonstrate by your participation in this steering committee, having a variety of perspectives and experiences and constituencies represented in the campaign will ensure that you're creating a leadership body that, many people across the community will see themselves in and want to be a part of. And then finally, I'll talk a little bit in a minute about what kind of staffing and support is required to move an effort like this forward, because to say the least, it's a heavy lift and really can't be done just on the goodwill of volunteers. There are a lot of systems and structures and practices that are required to raise, millions of dollars. So if we could go to the next slide, please. I'm going to dig in now to key considerations in each of those four areas, starting with the case for support. So the first thing to keep in mind, and you're obviously in the middle of this exercise just by envisioning what a facility could do with and for the community is to develop a story that is really focused around outcomes and unmet needs in the community. So it is very rare that people will give to a building just for building's sake. They like to give and are inspired to make donations to building campaigns when they can see that a building is actually helping to solve a problem or take advantage of an opportunity in a community. So really important that you don't go too, overboard on selling all of the features and benefits of the building. It's really, what are those features and benefits going to make possible, right? And remembering that your audience is people that you will need to inspire to make significant contributions. And I'll show you a gift table in a minute. Secondly, a key consideration for this project, because there are potentially so many pieces and parts to it, is that you may want, and especially if there's a large portion of the project that is going to be funded by tax dollars or other forms of public support, you may want to, and I actually would recommend that you isolate a particular element or elements of the building to be the focus of the campaign, so that it's very clear to people what the added value of philanthropy and giving and donations is to an otherwise big project that is going to be mostly funded through other sources. And this has worked well for other organizations in the community that you're all well aware of, like the YMCAs and Boys and Girls Clubs and others. This will also help with connecting with funders that actually will want to designate their gift to a particular portion of the project rather than just give overall to the building. And then finally, kind of to reinforce my initial point, it's going to be very important going forward that your case also include pretty specific details about the kinds of activities and programs that are going to be happening in the building, so that people aren't just hearing you talk about kind of wish list items, but you can say, here are the 3, 4, or 5 kinds of programs that we're going to offer either on our own or in partnership with other organizations. They serve these audiences and here's why they're needed, right? So while obviously right now, for a lot of good reasons, you're focusing a lot on the building program, you will need to turn your attention quickly and more deeply to the program plans for the building, the activities that are going to actually activate the building and ensure that it is serving all sorts of important needs in the community. So the next slide is focused on key considerations around donor engagement. And to state the obvious, there really is no existing donor base, right, for this project. There's not you're not an organization like, a YMCA even, or, an art museum or a symphony that would turn first to those who already have a relationship with the organization to invite them to support the campaign. So we did some prospect research. I'll walk through that in a minute. And again, just want to underscore that for some funders, especially foundations, they will likely want to earmark or designate their gift for a specific element or outcome of the project, rather than sort of support the project writ large. Secondly, when you think about donor engagement, recognition can be an important driver of a donor's willingness to give. And I also just want to note that there are a lot of really important conversations happening right now across the philanthropic universe about what naming opportunities mean, what do they convey in an era where we are all trying to be more inclusive and equitable. There are a lot of organizations that are asking the question of whether it's even appropriate to offer naming opportunities and feature, wealthy people in a building that is primarily designed to serve people who are not wealthy or less wealthy. So those are sort of values-based decisions that you're going to have to wrestle with as you move forward to determine, how you think about naming opportunities at donor or a broader program around donor recognition. And there's, again, a lot of good resources out there around that. And it is something that you'll have to consider because people will ask, they'll want to know, okay, if I'm going to give $1 million to this campaign, how are you going to recognize my gift? Or can I name a space? And what does it even mean to name a space? Does it mean that it's the Wagner pool? Or is there a sign that says, thank you, Jeff Wagner, for your donation in support of the pool, right? Big difference in terms of what that conveys. So those are the kinds of things that, and Jeff, sorry to pick on you, but I saw you on my screen first. So there you go. And then, I'm sure you're used to it. And then, naming opportunities are different than naming rights. And naming rights don't typically have a place in a fundraising campaign, but I just wanted to note here that, certainly we wanted to recognize in our research and report that could be an avenue that you want to explore, similar, to how other corporations attach their brand with large public facilities and entities across the country. And those decisions around naming rights are much more marketing driven than they are philanthropic driven. So that's just going to be important to keep in mind as well going forward. The next area is all about leadership. As I mentioned earlier, my feeling is this is really where all the at the beginning and end of the day, where the action is, because it's really hard to do all the other stuff if you don't have a really strong leadership team in place. And there are a couple of things that, I'm just suggesting that you consider going forward around this. The first is that in order to accept any kind of donations or grants, even in some cases to accept some forms of public funding, you will need to identify a registered tax exempt nonprofit organization that is firmly identified with the campaign. It could be an existing organization that has mission alignment with this project. And, the term that's used for that is that they would serve as the fiscal sponsor for the project. It could be that you go a step further with an existing organization and they actually would agree to kind of own and run the campaign for you. Or you can go to the next step, which would be to actually create a whole new nonprofit organization. That is not a simple thing. And it actually, is highly regulated, requires a lot of the people starting the organization and should be very carefully considered. So, my recommendation to you is just, if you're going to go, make sure you exhaust all of the possibilities of organizations that you could align with before you go the step of creating yet another nonprofit organization. There are already 1.5 million nonprofit organizations in the United States. So if we don't have to create another one, let's not do it. But if you do, then you do. The second thing here really has to do with volunteer leadership. You all are obviously exemplary of the kinds of community volunteers that you'll want to have surrounding this project to champion the campaign. Also, to be willing to sit and talk with people about the importance of giving and to ask for their support and by their association to convey that this project is really a top or the top priority for the community at this point in time. So you can see some characteristics and just considerations that I've listed here, wanting to make sure again that the committee, a volunteer leadership committee, represents the full range of identities and constituencies across the community, that you can think about, rather than having a huge committee that you have to manage and take care of, having maybe a smaller cabinet style group that then works with different subgroups on specific activities across the campaign that can be sort of started up and then closed down. That's and you know, volunteers really appreciate having specific tasks to work on. And finally, to think about who might be people in the community that you would want to lift up as an honorary co-chair. You know, someone or a group of people that don't necessarily have to do a lot of the work of the campaign, but by their association with the campaign, they would send a message to people that this is a really cool thing that's happening and you should be a part of it. So it's a great way to both honor people and through that honoring, convey to the rest of the community that you're doing something really special that people should be paying attention to. Next slide, please. So in terms of staffing and systems, depending on where you land on the nonprofit organization issue, there are a number of capacities or capabilities that you will definitely need to have in place to run a successful campaign. You know, you can sort of take the team of professionals approach where you either have consultants or contractors that are kind of embedded for a very specific period of time to basically do the work of the campaign and then they disappear. Or you can actually hire people into an organization that may end up staying with that organization beyond the opening of the facility to continue fundraising for programs and operations and all of that. And I've listed a few of the kinds of activities that these people, this team would manage both during the campaign and after the campaign. My feeling is that at a minimum, there should be someone designated as the campaign director. Preferably that person would have one or two administrative support partners to sort of help manage day-to-day activities, logistics, scheduling, all that stuff that, you know, just takes up a ton of time. But this campaign director person could really be more of an exterior community-facing person working with the committee to activate all sorts of relationships, help to ask for gifts, and just make sure that the campaign plan is on target. And if it's not, that it gets revisited and updated as needed. This is also an area that you could contract out for if you wanted to. There are consultants that it can either, again, serve as residential counsel or like what my firm does, serve more at an arm's length in an advisory capacity, sort of serving as a sounding board and a strategy partner for paid staff. And I think it would be fair to say that when you think about, well, how much is all of this going to cost us? You should be thinking about a campaign budget, that is the budget to run the campaign, that would be somewhere in the range of 10 to 20% of the campaign fundraising goal. So if you're going to have as a part of this project, say a $5 million campaign goal, you'd want to be adding to that another $500,000 to $1 million to essentially pay for the cost of running the campaign. And those are fixed costs. And, you know, most donors, foundations, funders in the community are very used to seeing those operating or overhead costs in campaign budgets, grant proposals, and all of that. So on the next slide, just a quick touchdown on the prospect research summary that I mentioned earlier. So our research really zeroed in on 4 possible sources of support that could be activated through a fundraising campaign. They include competitive grants that are available every 2 years through the state of Washington's Department of Commerce. They include competitive grants awarded by private foundations in the region. They include grants and sponsorships from private businesses in the region. And then Sort of the big, unknown is how much could you raise in donations from individuals and families with gifts at all levels, the $10 gift all the way up to the $100,000 gift and beyond. So when you think about, who would you approach through a campaign effort, having these 4 sources identified is a good place to start. And there's actually a lot of play that you can create between these sources by securing, a grant from a foundation that could be leveraged as a matching grant for individual donations, sponsorships from private businesses where businesses are kind of challenging each other in a friendly way to support the campaign. And, the state of Washington competitive grant programs are going to want to know what, the full scope of your fundraising activities are and how you're going to cover the balance of funds that they aren't able to provide in order to ensure that the whole project is funded. So our research, and again, this wasn't through interviewing anybody. We did not do a campaign feasibility study because there are no donors to talk to. But for your planning purposes, we're estimating a range of $2 to $5 million that could potentially be raised from all of these sources combined through a fundraising campaign. So the next slide shows you how that could happen in terms of size and number of gifts. And just to point out here that there's room and really a need for lots of different players to participate. Campaigns like this don't happen without big gifts, but they also need to be as inclusive as possible and ensure that there are points of time where you're reaching out to a broader community and really inviting their partnership and support. This assumes that some gifts and pledges would be paid over a 3 to 5 year period, which is also very typical in a campaign of this nature. And, ultimately you can see that there are 14 gifts of $100,000 or more that account for, the majority of the funds that would be raised through, in this hypothetical case, a $5 million fundraising campaign. So next slide, please. This is a picture of what a multi-year fundraising campaign could look like. You can see that basically the first year is what you have probably heard and experienced referenced as the quiet phase, where you're focusing on the largest gifts. I like to think of this as you have an empty jar and you're trying to put as many big rocks in the jar as possible first to fill up as much of the jar as you can. You'd be looking to raise as much as $2 million. And again, this is all built on a $5 million campaign goal, but raising, $2 of the $5 million during that first year. A lot of those gifts would probably be from individuals and families because it's pretty rare that a foundation is going to want to be the first donor in. They like to see that you've got something underway before they'll consider a grant proposal. Then you move into a major gifts phase that you can see stretches out for, maybe 18 months or so, where you're focusing on a broader range of gifts, medium size rocks in the jar, smaller rocks in the jar. This would be when you would be able to go apply for one of those competitive grants from the state of Washington. The campaign volume is getting louder. More people are hearing about it, being invited to learn about it, et cetera. And then, finishing up with a loud, fun, really energetic community phase where you're reaching out to and engaging the entire community, inviting support. This is, what you might think of in some campaigns as the bricks and tiles portion, where you're the giving is more sort of selling and transactional, and people have an opportunity to, be a part of, buying something that will be affixed to a wall or a tile on the ground or something like that. And the campaign is really fully public at that point. And when you go public, you really need to have the vast majority of your funds raised, because at that point, you're sort of filling the rest of the jar with small rocks, and it takes a lot of small rocks to get to the top of that jar. So that's a picture of how a campaign like this could work. And the next slide is somebody else's presentation. So I'll stop there and look forward to any questions you might have in a minute. Thank you. Ken, you're on mute.
Ken, you're muted.
Sorry about that. So one of the options moving forward is to look at how you would fund this potentially from, again, public taxing sources. And so one of the things that became apparent was that with 2 cities involved with this, there was desire and a need potentially to look at setting up a metropolitan park district as a way to provide a funding source that would be larger than just the individual cities themselves. So we started to look into this, and Econ Northwest did some calculations on what that might mean. So first of all, we had to try to identify what the market or the service area or the boundaries, if you will, of the park district might be. And so this map kind of represents that. Now, this is different than our map that identified our service area. We purposely reduced the size, cut out portions of the market area to the left there that were part of Kent and other Auburn and other areas where they obviously have established parks and recreation agencies. They have facilities, and we can't expect those cities to want to be, or a portion of their communities to be part of a metropolitan park district. So we excluded them out of there. So the green represents the boundaries of the 2 communities of Covington and Maple Valley, and that's certainly one area that we'll look at in a minute as the possible taxing district, and that's possible. You can set that up as the boundaries of the Metropolitan Park District. And then the kind of reddish area now that's been adjusted would be that larger Metropolitan Park District that goes out into a lot of areas of unincorporated King County. So with that in mind, then we looked at what it meant then from a funding source allocation that might be possible from these 2 potential boundaries for a metropolitan park district. So go ahead, Drew. So again, Econ Northwest started to develop some scenarios of what it would be to fund, in this particular case, basically the entire cost of the different options that were out there. So scenario 1 is that broader based model that we saw that goes beyond the 2 cities and takes in Black Diamond as well as other unincorporated areas of King County. And they did some calculations on the assessed valuation. There's limits on how much you can, as a MPD, you can levy from a tax perspective, and that was established, which is below. It's about 0.75, so it's below that at 0.43 on the levy. We factored in not only the capital side on this, which is basically the new construction number up there of about 144 million. We also factored in the subsidy that's going to be required annually to operate that facility. And basically then they looked at what was going to come out of that district through the tax sources on that, and the other debt requirements and what would be issued, the value of the home. And basically you get to the bottom line that says for a median home value in this area, in that red area that we were identified, it'd be about $196 a year from taxation to build and operate the facility. And, we did not at this point test that back to the communities or the area that might be involved with this to see the willingness of the area to, in a sense, support that kind of a tax initiative. That would be a later step if that's the direction that the 2 cities and others may want to go. But it does kind of identify kind of the taxing level that would be required to fund the facility as it's shown for what we call the complete or the full facility. So the second scenario then was saying, okay, if we only use the boundaries of the two cities themselves, Covington and Maple Valley, and that was the extent of then the Metropolitan Park District, what did that mean? And really what the reality was, it was going to be very difficult to fund a project of the magnitude and size that was originally envisioned. So the project was reduced in size and amenities, and we'll talk more about that later moving forward. And so the new construction went down to about $130 million. And then we looked at the same funding requirements. The levy rate is higher. You can see at 0.63 versus 0.43, because again, we're drawing from a smaller pool, if you will, in an assessed valuation number than we were in the larger district. So again, the calculations were done on what this meant and on the median home value within the two cities. And so that one came out to, even for this reduced facility option and the subsidy that went with it, of about $282. So it's about $100, not quite $100 more a year to fund that if you just made the boundaries Covington and Maple Valley. Obviously, then it's just the ability to fund a project of the original nature through just a taxing district that's made up of the two cities is going to be difficult. So it does require, to even put it in the range of being probably realistic to hope to get voter approval, required that we reduce the facility in size to be able to do that. So this is what was done, again, by Econ Northwest to try to come up with what may be involved from a taxing levy utilizing the Metropolitan Park District concept to fund the project itself. So this, now, again, it's based on the entire amount, not utilizing other sources of funding that may be able to reduce the level that's involved. So go ahead to the next. So, kind of some of the takeaways out of this, and they're pretty straightforward, is obviously the larger the geographic area, the lower the load is, the property tax load is for the residents. And so you can, in a sense, fund a bigger project because you have more people paying in, and it reduces what each resident or each homeowner is going to have to pay. One of the other things that's important that sometimes isn't always clearly understood is there's no direct relationship between the market area for the facility in terms of where people will come from to utilize the facility and where the district boundaries may be. Because the key thing on establishing the boundaries of a metropolitan park district is getting them established with folks that are likely to vote for inclusion or to tax themselves for that. So while on the one side, the larger geographic area that you get, the more revenue you can generate, there's also, as the bigger it gets, it's much more difficult from homeowners that are in the far outskirts of that geographic area to likely support the project. So oftentimes, if you oversize your market, or your, not your market, but your possible boundaries for the taxing district, you may not be able to get voter approval to, in a sense, establish the district and to also tax themselves. So they're not one and the same. Oftentimes they're a little bit different. They can be the same. It just depends upon the exact situation. But in this particular case, they don't match up directly. The size of the district also, and the jurisdictions that are located within it, has a large bearing on what the representation will be on the MPD board. So it kind of, the more entities you have, that kind of starts to drive not only the size of the board, but who's going to be represented outside that. The last piece is that oftentimes, if you establish, one of the motivations for establishing a larger MPD and for trying to get voter approval is the fact that usually going along with that is if they're within the boundaries of the MPD, then they are basically residents, if you will, of for the facts of setting fees within the MPD. So they'll have lower fees for use than would a non-resident. So they get included in there. So they get, if you will, discounts on the fees to utilize the facility, and then whether that's admission fees or program fees, it probably would include all of that. So there are incentives on there for people to be within the, that are within the boundaries of the MPD to decide to vote positively to tax themselves for the benefits that are derived out of that. So that's some of the background on kind of the MPD and what it means from a financing perspective for the project.
Thank you, Ken. I guess another couple of things to point out, and I'm actually going to just jump out real quick. When we did this was a simple calculation just to get some general numbers to see if it was feasible to pursue the MPDs. We didn't get into real specifics on the bond payments or different interest rates that might be available, but we did assume a 20-year bond and a 3.5% for anyone that really wants to get into the numbers on that. And then with that, that gets us to the next question. And this is where we'll open it up to all the steering committee members about if there was any further clarifications that we could provide on the funding mechanisms that we laid out tonight that are also in the report that everyone received or should have received.
I have a question.
Go, Rosie.
I have two questions actually. My first question is whether you could speak a little bit to the benefits of the Metropolitan Park District versus other district types, like a local improvement district or another type of small purpose district. And then my second question is if you could talk a little bit about the timing and logistics of having some of those specific program details in place before we start the capital campaign, since that hasn't really been something that's been focused on. So I'm just wondering, what are the steps for that and what does that logistically look like?
Maybe, Ken, I can just answer that question first quickly, if you'd like.
Sure.
So Rosie, one thing I should mention, which is sort of, I think, also kind of relevant to this MPD discussion, is that given that the campaign would pay for a relatively small portion of the project budget as we've sort of envisioned it here, it will be critical that the bigger questions are answered and actually in place before you launch a campaign, right? So all that to say that in some respects, the fundraising campaign is almost like the last thing that you would do in putting all of this together, because people are going to want to have a high degree of certainty that it's actually going to happen before they're willing to consider making a donation. So to your question, I think what that means is that a lot of the questions around tell me exactly what's going to be happening in this facility, who your partners are, I think a lot of that stuff's actually going to get sorted out well before you're in campaign mode. But you know, I like to use the just the metric of you kind of want to have 80% of your plans defined when you start having real conversations with people about making donations and considering grants, so that they have, you know, enough of an idea of what's going to be happening, but you don't necessarily need to have every last thing detailed, but you probably want to be 80% of the way there to be able to really clearly identify for people, again, not just what the building's going to look like, but what's actually going to be happening in the building. So I hope that helps answer your question.
Got it. Yes. No, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Ken, who wants to talk about the difference between the taxing districts? Yeah.
Yeah, there's and Econ Northwest looked at that. We did as well in terms of what other options. And really, Washington's kind of unique. Most states have one option, if you will, one kind of special district option and that's it. And Washington actually has a number of those. And there's Parks and Recreation Facilities District, and there's some other I forget the acronyms for it, but there are some other options as well. They have more limits on how they're established, how they're governed, their ability in terms of how they're funded. And so in the research that went on there, Econ Northwest felt, and it's generally the more accepted method because of using an MPD as being the best for this particular project. And that is the one that typically gets utilized the most because it's probably the easiest to accomplish, not to make it sound like it's simple by any means, but compared to some of the other options and the things that go with it. Now, Public Facilities District has a different form of taxation that uses sales tax, which is sometimes of interest, but you have to have enough tax base to generate enough income off of that. And it changed some of the dynamics of things, but it's a little bit harder. It's a relatively new mechanism that's out there for cities to look at. So anyway, through that process of looking at the different options that are available through by state statute, it was determined that the MPD was probably the best and most appropriate method for funding this from a taxing district perspective.
Yeah, and a lot of that, Ken, I believe, was based on the formation abilities and governance, not just the financing, because of especially the multiple cities and areas that would be wrapped into potentially funding this.
Right. So. Yep, that's absolutely true.
All right, I have one more follow-up question. How long does it take to get something like a Metropolitan Park District set up and approved and kind of off the ground?
That's probably a better question for Econ Northwest, but it's not a quick process. It takes time. You have to have approval from the different, the county has to, King County has to be willing to at least bring that forward. If you're going to include, obviously the two cities, that's probably the easiest, but any other entities that are within that, even Black Diamond, if you're going to bring them into that district, would have to be willing to say, yes, we will allow at least even to bring forward the idea for voter approval. So that takes a while. Then you have to go through setting up the election. You have to actually formulate the district and put in a great deal of paperwork. So I don't know, but it's probably realistically at least a year process before you would even really take it to the voters to even put it together. And it may take longer than that. I don't have the particulars. And again, Econ Northwest is probably much more on top of the actual timing on it, but it's not a quick process. It's a whole nother step. But again, some of the funding implications, and again, may require that be done. Again, if it's still to move the project forward, may be a necessary step in the process.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, just trying to get some like ballpark picture of if this is kind of a step one, how long before we know whether or not it's going to be successful or not.
Yeah, it takes a while.
Yeah, and another part of that was in the report is we had talked about doing a geocoded survey to just even judge what those boundaries would be. So that would be another step in this that would take time, because you would want to do that before sending it out and trying to create that district.
You want to know that people would be, you don't want to spend the time to find out it's probably going to get voted down. So you need to do some of your homework. And so it has a lot of just laying some groundwork before you would even get to the real paperwork of trying to establish that district to take to the voters for approval. That's true.
Thanks for the questions, Rosie. Anyone else? Seeing some heads nodding no. No hands are up, so. All right. Well, with that, I think our next slide is the break time. So everyone wants to take 5 minutes, and then we'll reconvene and jump back into the business and operation plans.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Drew. I'm going to sign off now, okay?
Yep. Thanks, Kate.
Okay. Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Okay, I think we're all regrouping. So I think we'll get going again. Give a couple more seconds here, make sure everyone's back. And Michael, if you want to let me know when you're good to start recording again, we'll get going.
You're good to go.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll get going again. I just saw something pop up. Oh. All right. Ken, we'll jump back to letting you have the floor again.
Okay. So one of the other key aspects of the planning effort, and obviously some of the basis for what you saw even on the funding side of it, is how is this facility going to operate? And what's it going to be taking in terms of everything from staff to utility costs and others, and what's the revenue potential that comes out of there? And so how did we arrive at those operational subsidy numbers that we showed earlier on the funding pages? So what we did is we built models for two options, the complete or full facility option, and then also the phased or the reduced size one, at least for the first step in the process. It's based on the building, what we call program, or the building amenities and their size. And it's also based on the concept plan that Drew will share with you here shortly as well. It's also a big part of this is the fact that the facility will draw users from well beyond just the two cities themselves. They'll draw from that larger secondary service area. And so it's the revenue stream, the utilization numbers are based on that larger market area that goes beyond the two cities. The facility will have a high rate of programming. In other words, there'll be a lot of activities taking place there that generates additional revenue dollars coming out of programs that are offered. And again, the notion, for the sake of this study at least, is that we developed this with an idea that, again, the Metropolitan Park District, or the MPD, would be the operating agency for this facility. Also, the fact that this facility would replace the Covington Aquatic Center, so that would no longer be an aquatic center. And that certainly plays into some of the utilization numbers in the new facility. We're not showing any debt service. This is an operating plan that looks at what your ongoing costs of operation. So it doesn't include any dollars to retire the debt that we've shown, but it does have capital replacement built in on an annual basis. And we project it out to at least 2025 being the first year that this facility would actually be operating. It could very well be later than that, but we've kind of forecast both everything from expenses and rates of compensation for staff, as well as fees and charges out as best we can to at least 2025. The other key thing that impacts especially the expense side of it is your hours of operation. So we established, for at least the sake of this study, the hours of operation that's basically 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. Monday through Friday, Saturday and Sundays reduced hours, but still pretty widespread. And that really comes down to about 108 hours a week of operation. So our staffing models are built off of that, and the fact that we have to have the facility up and operating, and everything from lifeguards in place and front desk staff and maintenance people to, in a sense, accommodate 7 days a week and 108 hours a week. So, you know, that drives, again, the expense side. Go ahead, Drew. On the other side of it, we also, for the revenue production side, we developed at least a representative fee structure for the facility that has daily admissions, 10 visit, discounted pass, a 3-month and annual. And as part of that, it's the ability to pay on a month-to-month basis. We have it then broken down on the left side by adults, youth rates, senior, and a family or a household rate. And we have designated already a resident and non-resident rate, the differential. It's about 25% between the resident and the non-resident. So that was, this is utilized to determine the revenue that's coming in from user fees for just straight utilization of the facility itself. And again, this is forecast out to be at least 2025, not necessarily here in 2021. So those are kind of the assumptions, if you will, that went into developing the operating plan for the two facility options. We utilized a lot of operations information from the existing Covington Aquatic Center in terms of rates of lifeguard compensation and other things, especially as it relates obviously to aquatic aspects of this facility. So we were modeling off of that as well as obviously probably the most relevant facility in terms of trying to develop an operating plan from. So go ahead, Drew. So what we did then is I'll show you some detailed breakdown on where we arrived at the expenses and the revenues for each of these options. But in option one, again, which is the larger facility, it's about 88,500 square feet. Operating expenses annually is going to be about $4.7 million. Revenues at about 3.9. And again, the operational shortfall, they're the difference, if you will, between expenses and revenues of about 758,000. The second option, it's smaller, it's 61,000 square feet. So our cost of operation is smaller, but so is our revenue, and some pieces are missing out of there that have been sized down that don't have the ability to generate as much revenue. So our revenue drops off, and actually this one has a slightly higher subsidy level, not dramatically, but about $24,000 more per year in subsidy than the larger facility does, but they're comparable in that. So that's kind of the summary of what that is. And now I'll just show you real quickly kind of how we developed what we call a line item budget. So we identified the staffing requirements, both full and part-time, and we'll show you a breakdown on that. And we established the positions that are necessary to operate the facility, the rates of compensation, the benefit percentage that needs to go with that for both those staff, the part-time staff, the numbers of staff. The hours are based on, again, the hours of operation, and we actually build a staffing model for everything from the number of lifeguards that we're going to need and the number of lifeguards that will be on duty at any particular time. To numbers of people at the front desk by time of the day of the week, all of that. Then we look at simple things like what we call operating supplies, and it's everything from office supplies to pool chemicals, which are based on obviously the size of the pool, maintenance supplies that are there, other items that may be included as well. And that's kind of the smallest piece of it. It's in this particular case, it's under 200,000. So go to the next slide. And this is kind of a continuation of that. So then we get to contractual, in a sense, category, and that's primarily made up of utilities. We try to base a utility cost on a cost per square foot at this point. And that's, I'm trying to forecast what it's going to be in 2025. And that's always an adventure. And obviously we're doing that without really yet even identifying what kind of systems we'll have in place. So we have to put a number out there. This one's reasonably conservative on the higher side of hopefully what it would be. Water and sewer, and that's water to fill the pool, run the showers, all of that. An insurance requirement, and again, that's based on this being run by an MPD and having an insurance allocation coming back that needs to be covered in this operating budget. Communications, which is everything from phone and computer, internet, all of that. Contract services, and those are things that you'll be paying for to, in a sense, everything from HVAC system services to security and managing and operating the building security system, a lot of other things for some, we kind of base that on the facility and what normally would be contracted for that. The other thing that's a little different, that's an additional cost, is because this would be an MPD, there will be just costs associated with managing the district itself that don't have necessarily a direct impact on the facility. That's kind of at this point a general estimate of what we think that would be we're not far enough into this thing to really identify what all may be part of that. It could be higher, it could be lower. Then we have things like advertising, rental equipment, trash pickup, bank charges, which are basically the fees you pay banks for the use of credit cards. And we calculate that based on the revenue that's generated and a percentage of that that'll be used, that'll be charged to get at that number. And then at the bottom, then we have really that capital replacement number. And we put that in there basically from year one, even though you should not be expending any dollars for capital replacement, you start collecting that and basically putting it in a revolving account. And so hopefully it's 3 or 4, maybe even longer before you actually utilize that money, but you built up hopefully a couple $100,000 to start working on replacement of ongoing equipment. So that's how we arrived at the numbers of about 4.7 million and about 4 million for the cost of operation. Go ahead, Drew. So the other side of it then is certainly the revenue potential. And I showed you earlier the fees that we base this on. So we calculate out how many people are going to come in and utilize the facility on a daily basis and things like drop-in fees, how many annual passes you're going to sell. It's based on the population in the market area and market penetration rates that are also tied to demographic characteristics and the presence of other providers, that type of thing. So we have a worksheet that gets us to these numbers. And so that you can see in there, it's a lot of pretty high revenue coming out of especially the monthly annuals in there as well. And then we have other forms that are, a little bit incorporated group rates, and then also pretty big numbers in aquatic rentals. And that's the rental of the competitive pool to swim teams and other things. And then also some general facility rentals, different spaces in the building, whether it's gymnasium, whether it's other spaces. And then we have worksheets in terms of what would be charged per hour, the number of rentals to get to those numbers. So that's how at least we get to the mid-range here. And then there's another slide, I think, that has some other miscellaneous sources, again, of the revenues. They're coming in through the programs themselves. These are the aquatic programs that would take place there. We base that on the number of people that would be taking the classes, rates for things like swim lessons, rates for fitness classes, rates for other programs that might take place in the gym. And you can see those are some pretty large revenue sources in terms of gross income that's there as well. And keep in mind, we're calculating out the cost of compensating instructors and that in our staffing model as well. So we're making sure we're including the expenses for all of those programs and services as well. In the end, we have some other dollars coming in through some resale of items, a child watch program that has a cost per hour, at least for non-members, and then also things like special event dollars, but in some vending, that type of thing. But big part of it's coming up through program fees and through user fees, and that's what it gets us at the 3.9 to or $3.2 million in revenue annually. So that's kind of a summary of our operating cost calculations. And again, beyond those sheets, there's about 20 sheets that all roll up to each other. So we have broken down the staff and the rates of compensation, all the other things that are worksheets that lead up to those numbers. But we try to tie that back to exactly the facility that's being proposed, and also tie it back to the market realities that are in place in terms of where the facility will draw users. So the next piece that comes out of this is, all right, so what possible economic impact would this facility have? What kind of economic dollars would it generate? So we have a couple of different sources. The first one is constructing the facility itself. That will have an economic impact on kind of the greater Covington, Maple Valley area. So we worked with ALSC to identify numbers of construction jobs, materials that would be utilized for this, purchasing that in terms of tax dollars, all of that. And so we figured if for option one, which is again the bigger, the complete option, that would generate about $67.5 million from just the construction of the facility itself. The option two is a little smaller, and so that number is smaller, about $45 million. So that's just the potential economic impact coming directly from the construction of the facility itself. So the next one then says, all right, once the facility is built, what are we generating annually in economic impact? And the first one is kind of from what we call direct, which is services that are coming directly out of that facility. So it's personnel. So how many people are we hiring? What are we paying them? We extracted this information directly out of our operations plan that I just went over. So it's based on the numbers that are in there. So we identified again from the dollars that would be coming through personnel costs, both full and part-time, certain operating materials and supplies and contracts for services, what that would be, and then also the taxes that are collected as part of the taxes on program fees and other things. So that comes out to about $4 million annually for the larger complete building option, and a little less, about 3.5 million for the more phased and smaller building itself. So that's kind of what we call the direct benefit. Then the last piece of this is saying, okay, from the people that are coming to utilize this facility and people that are outside of the market area that's been established, what kind of economic impact are we going to have? Excuse me. And we say the non-market area because when you calculate economic impact, folks that are already living within the greater Covington, Maple Valley area, they're not new. They're not bringing new dollars to the facility or to the area. They're already there and expending it. So it really doesn't, we can't count any dollars that they would be expending there because it'd be expending them anyway. So these are people that are coming outside of the market area that now are going to bring new dollars to the table. So we started to look at people coming from outside that market area that would be paying for use of the facility through admissions. We took a percentage of that, calculated that across the different fee options and ways to access the facility. Same thing for programs, same thing for rentals. Now, keep in mind that at this point, there's a lot that hasn't been totally defined about the facility. So, these are some big picture projections that could change pretty dramatically as we go forward with the project. And a lot of as we define more in this process, this will become a little more exacting. But at this point, this is a lot of assumptions that go into doing this. So, we calculate that out for about $1 million coming from, again, basically expenditures of dollars by people outside of that market area to use the facility and directly from the programs, the admissions and the rentals. And you see the difference between the two options. They're reasonably close. So then we take that, also one other option in there too, is we all started to look at what they would be expending on for other types of uses in there on a per visit aspect as well. And so we get to kind of then we summarize this then in the actual report for all of this of what that really means in terms of potential economic impact. So it's kind of at this point an exercise, if you will, to identify what the potential economic impact can be in all these different areas.
Thanks, Ken. So I guess the question's pretty evident here, but just wondering what else you might have questions about in the business and economic data that we presented.
I have a question between option 1, which is the complete build out, and option 2, which is a smaller version. On the smaller version, are we looking at the same size outer shell and just not completing the inside of the building until the need warrants? Or is this building a smaller building completely?
The building would be a smaller building to start with, and then looking at potentially adding on to it as the phased part of it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question, just particularly about the economic impact during the construction phase. Is there, when we have two different cities involved, is there ever discussion about how that economic impact will be split or divided between the two cities, or do the chips just fall as they may based on a bidding, because I know all that stuff has to be bid out, or like theoretically, could all the economic impact go to Maple Valley, and it probably can go outside of the two cities
Oh,
too, I
yeah.
would imagine. Is that part of the conversation at all, or just the chips fall where they may?
Well, it's really hard to do that. And we noted in our kind of assumptions in the actual document that there's been no attempt to identify where this economic impact will occur. So will it occur in Covington? Will it occur in Maple Valley? Will it occur in Kent for that matter?
Okay.
Generally, what you're doing on true economic impact, you're actually basing it on the realities. So you're able to actually calculate that out. So how many of the workforce came from Maple Valley, how much came from Covington, all that. So you have exact numbers. Obviously, we don't have that yet. So we didn't even try. That would be literally a guess. So we didn't try to say where that economic impact would actually occur.
It's basically a regional impact.
Yeah, it'll be regional in nature, but no, that's a good question, and that's a viable thing. So one of the things is that going to have that direct impact on, even if you said there's we'll split at 50-50, that wouldn't even be accurate, because a large, a portion of that for sure will be outside of the two communities for sure.
Thank you, Marita. Anyone else before we get into building costing and not seeing any hands, hearing any questions. So with that, I guess we'll just keep going on and maybe save a little bit of our evening here. So as Ken was mentioning, we kind of went through and laid out two different building options for people to kind of understand. And this also helps us develop kind of the cost modeling of how many people we need, and importantly for us, kind of square footage areas that we could start to determine kind of how much area we're actually talking about and the cost to build those areas. So really quick, we got into kind of where the different spaces would be. So multi-court spaces, our aquatics areas, locker room spaces, kind of public community space. This would be the entryway where people could just come and gather. Community spaces, whether that's teen drop off, child watch, those kind of spaces as well. The public art and performance areas. And then in here we got into locker rooms as well, having locker rooms for more of the dry side spaces versus locker rooms for the aquatics areas. And we didn't try to get into showing every little space and how it would lay out at this point, just due to the schedule and phase of where we're at. And then on the second level, we got into talking about or laying out where we could potentially have that elevated walking track or running area through the facility. So kind of taking up some of that secondary or second story space through the community gathering area, but then bringing that over and into the gym court areas up high. And then having studio spaces within that, and then also the weights and cardio space, and how that could all start to work together in that. And then these outer lines, there's kind of the roof area or space below. And so this was the complete building, the more comprehensive, larger build out. And then this also ties back into our MPD catchment areas and how we are looking at funding and building that operation budget. So we simplified down based off of the program areas for tonight's discussion, but carried the square footage values for each of those areas. And then in that, we calculated our 2021 construction costs for those areas, and then also a 2026 construction cost with inflation. And for that, we utilized a 4% 4% year over year inflation value from the 2021 to help drive that, because everything tends to go up in costs year after year, unless we have a recession or major downturn. So that's how we start to calculate that, because we're calculating in today's dollars, which has been extremely volatile. And we understand that, and we don't know where the market's going to be. So we've gone on a kind of somewhat conservative, not overly conservative route, because we don't want to scare people from being able to think that this is feasible. But at the same time, we also don't want to tell you a set value and then it ends up basically hampering the building program. And we've compared this with other facilities in the region. Green Lake Rec Center up in Seattle was an easy one that just came out and had some good info, and we're right in the kind of target area of that basically, and a little bit lower, which given the proximity probably makes sense in the two different market areas. So I'm not going to get into each of these spaces, but you can kind of work out the numbers backwards for cost per area. What I will say is certain areas like aquatics facility areas are more expensive than, say, the central lobby area administration spaces within the facility. So if you were to calculate those, you'd see that difference in the cost per square foot. And then additionally, part of that is us going through, and since it is very early in the project, making sure that we're providing an ample amount of core and circulation spaces in addition to the general spaces that we've identified. And that's just a planning factor as we're going through the project. And so what we end up with is a total building square footage cost, and we're kind of looking at a construction cost of that being $49.5 million if you were to build that today in the current market. And then in 5 years, when you escalate that out, that would be 60.2 million. And then what we had to do on top of this was one of the things that we don't have included in this is any land purchases. It's such an unknown that we can't really predict what that would be. And since we also didn't have a site selected, we also don't know the exact amount of what that development might be. So we had to determine an allowance on that. And so we went through a couple different pieces and decided not to go overly conservative and use the extensive site development costs, or go and kind of hamper ourselves down the road with a moderate site development cost. So we went with the average site development cost of a kind of future site at 14% of the overall building square foot cost. And so that then starts to add into our total. And then what we also started doing was adding GCs, general conditions, and contingency items as builders and kind of designers end up doing in their budgets, to make sure that as you're going through the design, you can accommodate the unknowns that come up through that process. And then what that ends up giving you is a total construction cost. And that puts us kind of in that 68.7 and $83.6 million range for the 2 years. The next big item that you have to factor in on that is soft costs. And the soft costs is a whole array of items that includes furniture, fixture, and equipment, or FF&E. It also includes the design and engineering fees, permitting fees, testing and balancing, insurance, bonding, taxes, all of these unknowns. Well, not unknowns, but things that get added on to the project. And that here is in that 25 to 30 million range. And so what that pushes the kind of full building project up to, in today's dollars, would be almost $94 million, which in 2026 construction costs is $114 million once you carry through that escalation. So that tied back to those MPD numbers that you saw, where we're looking at how do we derive basically 115 million with that 43-cent taxation rate on the home valuation and that MPD. And so that was for the overall building. And then as we move forward through to the kind of more reduced option, what we did, and Jeff, this kind of will hopefully answer your question. These dashed lines and the gray areas here would kind of be where we've reduced that footprint from the option 1 layout. And so we've taken it down to a singular multi-purpose court space or gym area. We've cut back the community area, scaled back kind of locker room areas, move that administrative piece up into this area and reduce the overall locker room areas, and then reduce the aquatics portion of the building as well. And then on the second level, what we've done is also gotten rid of the future indoor track piece. Now that it's been shrunk back, we've maintained the studios and the weights area because they're complementary uses with the aquatics. And our big piece in this reduction was looking at what areas can we take out of the project that impact the overall bottom line or revenue generating spaces the least, but still allow us to provide spaces that the community needs and is expressed the need for. And so we went through those, and then just to continue, same kind of chart, the reduced areas with the lobby. The wellness venue is a big one that saw the reduction mostly in those multi-purpose court spaces. And then some reduction in the locker room areas, and then reductions in the aquatic center as well. And what that gets us through as you go through all of these different line items, it's the same percentages of cost escalation over the 5 years that we've looked at this, is it ends up moving you into kind of a overall total project cost of 62.4 million or 76 million for that reduced building footprint area. So this also ties into that smaller MPD district of the two cities. So, and that was in case, say that the MPD wouldn't be successful incorporating the larger area, but would work within the cities of Covington and Maple Valley. It was, how do we make sure that we're providing an option for that as well? So we went through that, and that was how we kind of determined that cost there. And I think the big piece of that was just trying to understand how does that begin to feed that MPD, help Ken develop all of the business planning around that and the operational costs. So on that, I was going to just see if any of one had opinions on the two or want to talk more about which they felt was the most likely to gain support for funding within the community.
Well, personally, I like option 1, which is bigger, and you're going to gain, I mean, it's going to cost a lot more, but I think that option 1 has a lot more to offer for the community. You know, like with the indoor track, with the bigger aquatic center. I mean, the pool looks the same size in either option, but the ability to add more amenities and offer more activities for the public, I feel that option 1 would appeal to more people. Now, the likelihood of getting unincorporated King County and working with King County to get the MPD out in that area is probably going to be more difficult, but just means that those that are working on this campaign would just have a lot more work to do.
Thank you, Jeff. Christina, I see your hand up.
Sitting in a dark room right now, so you can't really see me, but I agree wholeheartedly with what Mayor Wagner said, and it would be a shame if we started and took on such a phenomenal and large project only to find that, you know, several years down the road, our city has grown, our neighboring cities have grown, and we're too small. I agree that the facilities have to be multi-purpose, multi-use, and I really like option 1 as well. The indoor track is brilliant. It would be really sad if we had to take that away. But most importantly, just to make sure that we're not outgrowing it as we speak and plan it already. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Christina. That's a good point. And generally, all of these facilities, even if you plan for the best, will feel too small when you open them up, but we'll do everything we can to keep moving it in the right direction for you guys. Anyone else?
What was the overall cost of the option one? Did you do spreadsheets on that?
Yeah, we didn't, they're in the report. We didn't include them here, but I'll just jump back up to that. So option one, the total in today's dollars would be 94 million approximately. And then in 2026, we're projecting that to be 114.2 million.
Okay. And the other question that I had was, where are the utilities going to be in the building? The elevator and the heating and air conditioning and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and at this point, we're not showing those. We're just trying to show general space and coordination of that. And that's where some of this 14% core and circulation space is kind of the unknown areas. We have that allotted with this number. So Linda, your question, we didn't lay out all of those spaces and get into that level of planning for the study. It was more of taking general areas that has some of those values associated with them. Whether that's storage areas associated with these spaces, there's breakdowns of all the program spaces in the report in the appendix, but for this, we're not showing every one of those little spaces in these plans, if that helps you.
Okay, so we're looking for option one, we're looking at 114 million.
Yep.
And for option two,
if you want the 2026, it's 76 million.
thank you.
Yep. Any other questions, comments? Oh, I see Chris with his hand up.
And I apologize if this is in the report, but do we have benchmarks from actual construction of actual facilities of similar sizes and such that we can reference against? I mean, when we do modeling like this, we know we can tweak, a couple assumptions here and there, and suddenly it's 20% more expensive, 20% less. I'm just curious what the real benchmarks are and if we have access to see any of those.
Yeah, so we took kind of our current construction dollars and added those up. And at this point, I don't know if there's really any advantage in trying to manipulate those or show them because we are so early. I think that's something that we could, it's not in our actual documents to show those price points because that's also another area as we keep moving forward and refining these, we're gonna kind of reevaluate and kind of readjust those pricing points as we move forward. So this is really just to try to get the baseline based on what we're seeing as current construction dollars in the market today. Does that help answer?
I understand. Yep.
Anyone else? I know this is big numbers and not sure how much people had a chance to look at all of them in the report, but don't want to jump off an important subject if we have more questions and people are thinking about them.
It seemed to me, this is Brock, that the soft costs were quite a bit of the total. I mean, I see that, it's the permits and the taxes and things like that. So it's a real cost, but that sure seems to be a big part of the whole overall fee. So
yeah, and it's not unheard of for soft costs to kind of push that up into the 30% range of the overall project, especially in these kind of facilities. You start looking at gym equipment going in and weights and all of those pieces, the furniture that would populate kind of the lobby, any of those art installations, all of those pieces really start to add up into the overall cost of the facility.
That's huge.
And
But
I'm sorry to interrupt one more time. These are mere estimates, naturally. If it costs less, absolutely, then sure, we won't be using the entire total there. And maybe other things will cost more or vice versa.
exactly. Just as an example, currently we're seeing, so when we started this, wood prices were 150% more than what they usually were. And then they've started to come back down. And then it was PVC pricing that went way up. So that's another side of this. And then where does labor start to fall into this? So yeah, there's some ebbs and flows, and certain things we might be high on, but other areas we might end up being low on, Christina.
I think one other comment I'll make is that, the choice is do it now or do it later. And I think even though it's more money later, I think you're better off waiting and spending the time and the effort to make it a good proposal, and go for the option one, which is, like we've already said, gives you all the bells and whistles, and it becomes a better sales position because you've got more stuff to offer the people. So
Yep. And Brock, you're right. The longer you wait, the more it costs. So if you wait to do those additional square footages and the smaller option and spread that out, it's going to end up costing more to build that second piece as it gets phased in than if it was in part of option one.
Yeah.
So that's a good point to also keep in the back of everyone's head as they're talking about this project. Matt Kehoe, I see your hand.
Hey, thanks, guys. This is a lot of data for us all to be taking in. I'm still catching up, even though I've had a lot of advanced time with it. So I hope that the committee members feel like they can digest and get back to me for certain. And we have this expertise of ALSC with us for a while. This is not the end of the meeting, but I just wanted to interject that I feel the pain. There's some really interesting aspects to the things that I just heard, and I want to just relate those to keep the ideas running, and maybe see if it assists anybody else in making some conclusions. First I'll start with, we got two options in front of us and both have been found feasible, and that's an enormous accomplishment. And we're really thrilled to be told, how could you produce these two options in our area with what kind of funding sources? And it may seem simplistic at times, but when they look at the Metropolitan Park District, they really looked at what would this translate. And in that process of saying these are two feasible options, there's some strong points. Maybe we'll just create a little talking sheet for all of us. But there's a word used, sometimes unpopular word, called subsidy. And it was a very interesting point after it's all said and done, that it actually takes less subsidy to run option number one. I'm not biased, I'm not trying to push for it, but it's just that point that the committee's already making. You have more activity, more draw, you have more revenue, scaled at least to the point that it makes up some of the differences. You pay less annually for what doesn't cover its own cost because of the larger facility. So, talking points might be a campaign measure, far beyond my job. But I would just say that there is a subsidy question, and it's very interesting that you pay less annually to make up the difference for the larger facility. And then I think another irony of this is the larger facility, if you didn't track this one point, I think it's significant. The larger option actually has a lower cost per household in taxes, because they've done this study to tell us what's feasible. What is the tax rate that is required? And even though the capital is more expensive, it turns out that the district, now you need willing taxpayers, but that larger district of those getting the services and the benefits of this new community asset, that larger group means lower household cost, tax-wise. So it's interesting to realize that you can make arguments, and probably very good ones, for both feasible size projects. I really appreciate that the committee is weighing in on what they think is the highest priority. There is that reality of how do you get a large district in place. Just my observations, and thanks for listening to me.
Yeah, Matthew, thank you. And I just wanted to touch on the point of the two districts. The one was a 0.43 tax or levy rate versus a 0.63. And to what Matthew was stating, just to rehash that from earlier in the night, that's a $196 per household for the larger facility versus $282 per household for the smaller option. So that's another good point there. And then I think a couple other things that were in the report that we didn't copy into here, but just making sure that everyone's continuing to engage the community on the needs and the programming that needs to be in this facility. This isn't the end of it. This is just the beginning of the process and understanding what needs to be in there. Continuing to keep everyone educated and informed, and gaining additional input only helps strengthen the case of getting it built. And then the other part, which we kind of touched on, was the land acquisition costs. That's another one to keep an eye on, and understanding what's available for the project and from the two cities or in the area to kind of figure out where that's going to go, and weighing those development costs. Just because a site might be a cheaper site, upfront costs, you have to monitor that actual kind of construction or site improvement costs that would get associated with that. And then looking to develop partnerships, maybe there's an equity partner to help kind of fund or get some of that land going, and also help with the overall cost of supporting that facility. Matthew, I saw your hand up. I don't know if that's because it was left up and then it just went away. So I'm guessing you're done.
You got it.
All right.
Drew, this is Rustin. I want to ask Ken Ballard one thing really quickly here. When you look at that since Matthew brought up the issue of subsidy, and to see a cost recovery of between the two options, between 80% and 84%, really is on the upper end in the studies that we've been involved with, and Ken certainly has that expertise. I'd just like to have him weigh in on where that is relative to some of the other feasibility study findings that we've had.
Yeah, I know on a percentage basis, the cost recovery rate's pretty good. In the 80s is great. Anything, in the 70s is actually not bad either. And so we're above that rate, and getting, anything above the mid 80s is pretty exceptional and pretty rare. So yeah, we're, from a percentage basis, our cost recovery rate on both options is pretty strong. It still ultimately comes down to what the actual dollars are annually in terms of funding, but as comparison to other facilities, and it's always dangerous because it's what people include in their cost recovery varies. So it's sometimes you'll hear some numbers all over the page and they don't always add up. But generally speaking, in the mid to upper 80s is a real strong cost recovery rate, and that's where we are.
I also want to point out that in the MPD models for the funding, that cost recovery, that 20% roughly, is shown as being financed, meaning it would not be taking out of your general fund.
No,
it would all be covered within this funding package.
Yeah, either option is, and the funding that we're showing funds the project, both capital and operations. So it doesn't have to come from any other source. So we're not showing you anything that isn't funded through the MPD options that we've shown. Now, again, as you go back to Kate's thing, there's ways to potentially reduce that number. Again, what we're showing right now is the total capital piece of that being borne by the taxpayers. And the reality is, in some of the models we've shown you there, I think there's ways to reduce that. Are we going to cut it in half? No. Could we reduce it 15, 20% conceivably. So, you know, it's kind of almost a worst case scenario in terms of the tax load back to the you know, again, the homeowners in the two MPDs, the two MPD options, and it could in effect be lower.
Matthew, I see you have your hand back up.
I did, Drew, and forgive me for delaying anything.
No.
I just wanted to be sure we got it clear when we're talking about cost recoveries as that came up. And I could be mistaken. So for everyone's benefit, cost recovery is really an essence of operations. How much of the operational costs are recovered? So
right.
we jump between subjects sometimes when we're talking about this, and it's just, I like to slow down a little bit and say, when we say 80% cost recovery, that's about the operational cost. The capital costs are being accounted for through the MPD, but that's not the same thing as a cost recovery. All we're talking about is what it costs to operate, and that we're at 80% recovery.
Yeah.
Yes. Thanks for the clarification there, Matthew. And you're not delaying us at all. We have plenty of time. We're actually ahead of schedule here. So anyone else have questions? I know this is a big subject, so that's why I'm kind of asking repeatedly, just to make sure. And if not, we will keep moving on. So I'm not seeing any more hands coming up. Okay. So again, as we talked about earlier, we had the feasibility study, and that's where we're at. And I think our next big step here, which we'll do a little vote here in a little bit, is that we're going to be finalizing that report that we got sent out to you guys a couple weeks ago now, and looking to incorporate feedback that you might have from your review of it, or that's come up tonight, just to make sure that we get that finalized. And then we'd like to move forward with getting a motion and kind of a roll call vote of kind of moving the report forward and having the backing of the steering committee on this to take it to the two city councils here at the end of October. Linda, I see your hand up.
Yeah, at which point on this chart are we going to put together the vote for the MPD?
The MPD would kind of start behind this feasibility study before the design phase. A lot of that's contingent on determining a site within the two areas or within the community. Having that figured out, because that drives kind of understanding where the MPD boundaries would get formulated as well.
So we really need to modify that chart, because there's a lot to be done before we start the design phase.
Yeah, and it's kind of a inner step here between feasibility study and design phase. These are kind of the big moves within the process here. Does that help, Linda?
Yeah, except I just wonder when we're going to do it, because you said that or somebody said that it was going to take probably a year to do the MPD and get the vote to know whether or not the citizens are even willing to go along with this.
Yeah, and that doesn't preclude us from doing some of it. I know that there's a grant for some of that design phase work and moving forward on this, but understanding the site and whether or not the MPD boundaries is a feasible means is kind of one of the next steps here. There's a whole bunch of next steps that are outlined in that report that we'll run through here real quick. It's on page 11 of the report. Rosie, I see your hand.
Yeah, I have a piece of feedback on the report that's like super small, but on page 9 of the report, it has this chart, but the design phase and the funding are switched. So in the report, it says funding comes after feasibility study, which was one thing I had questions about as I was going through and reading it. So I don't know if there's a new chart that could be put in the report. But it sounds like we need to do some of that design phase before we get to the capital campaign.
Yep. That's correct. And we'll look at page 9 and I'll double check that.
All right, it's page 9 of the PDF. The actual report page says 5 though.
Okay. Okay, I got that written down. Are there any other items that people wanted to bring up in the report for amendment? If not, I guess we'll hopefully get someone to bring a motion to bring it forward to the city councils.
I'd like to make a motion to bring the study forward to both city councils for future discussions.
Second.
Thank you. We'll do a roll call vote, I guess, with that second that I heard in there.
Who had the second? I'm sorry.
Christina.
Christina, thank you.
I'll just go through the list here. Brock, you're at the top again still.
Yeah, I'm for it. Yes.
Jeff.
Yes.
Chris.
Yes.
Jim.
Yes, option 1.
Marita.
Yes.
Yes.
Rosie. Christina. Since you seconded it, I'm going to say
There
that
it
that
is.
was a yes.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you.
Laura.
Yes.
Here, did I miss anyone? I think I got everyone.
Did you get Linda?
Linda, no, I missed Linda. Linda.
Yes.
I think it's unanimous. So we will finalize the report and get that to the city councils. Here, I'm gonna check my phone just to check the dates here. So you all have that. Our tentative dates on that are the 25th and the 26th of October to take it to the two cities of Covington and Maple Valley. That's their respective dates. So we'll look at getting that finalized here in the next week and a half so that we can get that into them on their required acceptance dates for their meeting on the basically end of October here. So thank you, everyone.
So I've got a quick question. So if
Yeah.
we got feedback, you want it in the next week or so? Is that feedback?
Yeah, if we could preferably have that probably here within the next couple days. Ideally, we'd probably get that feedback here so everyone could hear it. But I think if we can share that amongst everyone, those comments, and just make sure everyone's still amicable to them.
Okay. So by Monday, maybe have everything in from us.
Yeah, that'd be ideal.
Okay. Thanks.
So I guess I just wanted to kind of run through some of the quick items that were on page 11 of the report for the next steps. And these aren't in any particular order, but I'll just read through them in the order that we had them there. It's establishing the community advocacy group, conducting that detailed geocoded survey. There'd be a basically at some point getting the capital campaign planning study started, establishing that 501c3 that Kate talked about earlier, determining a final site, everyone engaging the community and continuing to do their part there. Also developing relationships with potential partners within the community, the establishment of the Metropolitan Park District, and then moving forward more with the design of the facility and kind of the programmatic needs, just keeping those evolving and kind of building upon themselves. So those are kind of the next steps that we identified in the report, and will be important to developing this. On that, the facility design phase approach and timing, I know there's been some talk about hoping to get that started here in short order. Matt, I know you're a key proponent of that, moving that forward. I don't know if there's more to talk about on that. I think the real part's really getting this out to the city councils. So I guess the next part is kind of having a quick discussion on challenges to making progress in the next phases of the project that everyone might see that we should be aware of, and make sure we have at top of our mind as we move forward. And I'll just open up the floor here, the steering committee members, to run through those. If anyone has any concerns. Oh. No concerns?
I was gonna say, raising money, that's gonna be a big one, obviously. But I think we're doing a good job of getting the word out. It'd be interesting to see what the city councils say.
I think the big challenge, the next step as I see it, is the MPD, and that takes a 501c3. We need to identify that. And we need to know which location we're going to be using, because that would broaden the scope on the MP or on the 501c3 and get the vote taken so that we know whether we're going to go forward or not. That seems to me to be one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah, or which way you're moving forward, because there are the two feasible options that we pointed out, whether or not it's the smaller one with the smaller MPD district versus the larger. But thank you, Linda.
Yeah, Jim here. I really feel the location might be critical in each one of the city councils endorsing this project. So is there any property out there that we've looked at or have an idea of where we might place this to put it centrally located?
Yeah, we have 3 sites identified that are all central, you could say, to the overall catchment area that's been shown. And then if you go more zoomed in, one's maybe more central to the city of Covington. That was the site that actually ranked the highest and was the recommendation of the report. There's a site in Maple Valley that scored the second best, that also has great legs to stand on. And then a third site that's kind of located between the 2 cities. It's on the eastern side of Covington, but still pretty close to both cities. But with all 3 of them being very centrally located.
So getting the councils to take a look at those locations and seeing which ones they like, I think might be a good input from them.
Yeah, I'm sure that'll be a large part of the discussions with the 2 city councils, because everyone wants it in their city, their home. Understandably.
Laura here, and that just to piggyback off of what you said, if I have a concern, that's kind of it right there. Sort of a, we want it in our place, and if we can't have it, then the answer is no mentality that might creep up. I mean, hasn't come up in our group, but in the wider population, I know people like to have things that they want close to their cities. And so that is something that I worry about and wonder about a little bit is hopefully people can see past that to the bigger picture of having a facility, period. But I worry that people might just be like, well, if we can't have it here, then it's not worth it.
Yeah, and that was a large part of even our conversations. It's just making sure that there is an identified site so that we can start those conversations, Laura, of how do we approach whether or not it's in one city over the other, and make sure that everyone can be amicable to where it ends up being. Any other concerns, challenges?
Hey, Drew, if I might speak up, this is Matt.
Yeah.
And Drew made a reference earlier that I tend to want to rush us into design, and I'm not trying to put words in his mouth. I wanted just to explain a bit about motivation and strategy. I have come to believe that the designing is going to really assist the community with evaluating the project. It still remains difficult with concept drawings and kind of feasibility level graphics to help people really envision this thing. So the thing I appreciate we're working towards a little bit as a group tonight is strategic communications. And I believe that getting some more design details is going to be part of the success. And it is going to make things more real. And same applies to the idea of where is the site. It's just a reality check at the moment when we go to the councils and when we're in a feasibility study site review to say, there are unknowns coming. There are circumstances changing. All we can do, as Rustin has said, is take a snapshot and show you how the current criteria reviewed by your body and soon enough our councils, how the current criteria chose one site for the current circumstances. It happens to be the town center site of Covington. It's publicly owned. That's not the only reason it came up high, but you just heard how land costs are not factored in to what is a feasible project with high capital expenses. So if a property were to come in, even the number 2 site under public ownership, meaning not a cost to the city of Maple Valley, and circumstances change, it's really nice to know that this report gives you the baseline of how and where this program and these 2 options could fit. They could fit on either location or the third location, which I'm willing to say out loud is the Lake Point property. So what we're getting is baseline of what is feasible with knowing current circumstances, and all 3 sites are viable. And that's a really important message for the councils to hear. And then to understand that maybe at this time, in order to press the project, we say based on today's circumstances, we'll go with this site, how it's ranked, so that people can get more real about it. You know, I'm not going to project that is what the council should do. If the 2 councils really agree with what I'm hearing some of you speak tonight, which is that option 1 makes sense, that's a larger facility, and maybe a larger property like the one in Maple Valley starts to emerge. I think what we have to say though is that we're allowing priorities and sites and costs to emerge. And that's exactly what a feasibility study, and this one particularly, has done. It said, here are multiple sites and options. They're feasible. You've got to make some choices. And I, again, just wanted to point out that as we get a little closer to design and maybe more of that input from what Drew calls a geo-coded survey, meaning we start to realize, is that larger district possible? Where are the likely voters? That'll inform us whether or not we, and maybe it's a year down the road and circumstances changed enough that we're ready to look at a new site. So I guess I'm just stressing more detail comes with deliberate professional kind of design and commitment to listening. We're going to have to be sure that the 2 councils understand that. I love that Laura just brought up, ideally they'll hear the answer of and the outcome of having a facility, period. And we will be saying strategically, there will be no facility if it's done by one city, because we cannot individually as cities do this. So there's some basic communications and strategies to why we design together and why we continue to work together and track each other, not in a and only in a cooperative way. I hope that makes some sense and gives us some confidence that we're bringing to our councils a cooperative product, a consensus-based one, even if the consensus changes over time.
Yeah, thank you, Matt.
So Drew, I just kind of want to put a bow on a couple of things. I'm getting a lot of bounce back from something. Here's the exciting part. It's feasible. You've seen the lengths that that your staff and our team have gone through to be able, with great confidence, to be able to make that statement. It is sticking a stake in the ground that takes all of the work and all of the feedback and all of the background information and just lessons learned from lots of other facilities like this. And it just sticks a stake in the ground. It doesn't mean that stake has to stay there. In fact, I guarantee you it won't. It's going to move again and again and again. But for this moment in time, what we've all been talking about and studying is feasible. And that's exciting. That's a huge boost for a community-based group to celebrate and take that message out and say, do we have it all worked out to the dollar and to the exact square footage? No. And that's a good thing. That's an invitation to show that, yeah, there's still some vulnerability in this. There's still opportunity to learn more, take more input. And I guarantee you get much more of a reaction from the average citizen when you show them something much more specific, to Matthew's point, a little bit more design work that starts to get more specific. I guarantee you will get much more of a reaction from someone that says, well, where's this? Well, where's that? What about this? And it just perpetuates that dialogue, strengthens the program, and ultimately that output. So it's a fantastic place to be right now. We're very, very excited for you. Yes, there are sites available. Are they going to be available in a year? I don't know, but they may or may not. Others may be. In fact, I'm sure they will be. So you're in a great spot, and we're really very honored to come beside you to bring you to this point, and then to identify those next steps and just keep it going. Again, this is not just something goes on the shelf. As I said earlier, this is a vessel. We've all created this together. It needs to continue to be carried. And the more community-based the carrier of that vessel is, the better your chances are to get this thing approved, passed, and built. So that's where all of you, being ambassadors and great communicators and passionate for all the right reasons about facilities, not so much program and the value proposition that something like this brings to your community and attracts new families and new businesses and quality of life, all those things. My goodness, that's what's so wonderful about a facility type like this. It totally can be a game changer for communities. So I'll be quiet now, and we're going to ask just your final impressions as steering committee members before we close up.
Well, I'd just like to say that working with each of you on this steering committee has just been very outstanding. Everybody's input and coming to this final feasibility study, but not just the steering committee, but also the core planning group, everybody working together to come to where we're at now. You've got to plant seeds to watch it grow and to see things come to fruition. And I think we've got those seeds planted, and we're going to see a very great center coming out of this.
Thank you, Jeff. Anyone else? Who's going to be next? Don't be shy.
Okay, I'll go next. I just want to compliment you, Drew and Rustin, and your team on the work that you have done putting this together, pulling a lot of people together from a lot of different places, and really coming up with a great final product. I know this has gone longer and had more rabbit trails than I think anybody anticipated when we first started this project. And I really compliment you on the great job that you guys have done. When we moved into the city, my family and I 12 years ago, this wasn't even like a dream. It seemed so out of touch. We couldn't even begin to think about it. And now we have a possible reality. And so that's very, very exciting. I know that it'll take a while for it to come about. Things moving at the speed of government are never as fast as we want them to be. But it's beyond just me and my family. This is about my community and the future of my community and the people who are here now, but also the people who will come after us. And so I'm excited to hopefully see this continue to grow and develop and eventually come to fruition.
Thank you, Laura. We agree. Christina, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I just want to echo everybody's praises. This has been quite the journey, and to finally be on the precipice of seeing something physical, something on paper, like Laura said, just a dream come true is so amazing. Matthew has been out there. He champions every park, and I often run into him, talking to people about this entire project. And I had the opportunity to be with him at the farmers market, and people have so many questions, but it's kind of like a child. If you tell them, it's one thing, but if you show them, oh my goodness, it's magnificent. Like now they have something to dream for. Now they have something to really conceptualize. And I agree with having a little more detail and something that we can show people when we run into them. As far as the councils, I do hope that we can all take a step back and not only count the blessings that would come with such a project in either city, but also the responsibilities. This isn't something simple, and it'll come with its own consequences. So I do hope that everyone takes a solid, wholesome view at this and makes a very educated and wise decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Rosie.
Yeah, I again want to echo everyone's statements, and I want to say thank you to Drew and Rustin and team for making our community feel heard. I think that's one thing that I really appreciated about the feasibility study is when the steering committee in the very beginning said, maybe we need a little bit more community input, I saw that happen. And so I just want to say thank you for that. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate that the needs of the community have been reflected in the report. And I think just one thing I wanted to say is I'm walking away from this with a feeling of hope. And that is what I am going to transmit to all of my community members and the other folks on the Parks and Recreation Commission and Maple Valley is I am hopeful and I am excited about what's going to happen next.
Thank you, Rosie.
That's awesome.
Anyone else? Either jump in, raise your hand.
I'll jump in. It's Linda. I think you've done a wonderful job in planting the seeds of a dream. And I think it's important for our communities to get infected with that virus, the dream virus, because then they have a vision of what might be and will be more willing to work with us. So we need to be dream makers right now to bring this to fruition. And I appreciate the work that you guys have done through some phenomenally crazy times with COVID and a year-long delay and still keeping going with Zoom. So it's been great working with you. So thank you.
Thank you. And thanks everyone else for joining us on Zoom for all of these wonderful meetings. It would have been better to meet in person, but Brock.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank the team for letting a representative from Black Diamond on it, just to keep our community a part of this, because we're neighbors and we work together in the Tri-City arena. So it's good to be a part of the team, because I know you'll get a lot of people from here visiting the facility. So that's cool. Thanks for letting me be a part of it.
we're glad you were there.
I'll say the
Jim?
same. Thank you. Thank you so much for all the hard work. It's been an incredible experience to see the progress each time we meet. And so I just appreciate all the hard work you guys put into it. And I really also appreciated all of the committee members and the individual perspectives that went into it. And it was interesting to me to hear everybody's different types of questions. And so it, because we all come from different perspectives. And so I really appreciated hearing from my fellow committee members and knowing that we're all, you know, after this one goal. And so thank you to all of you as well. But thanks to everybody in this group. And I look forward to the next step.
Thank you, Marita. All right, I don't want to name call the last couple people, but if I have to.
All right, I'm Jim. Yeah, being part of this, at first I was a little bit worried that we didn't see the whole picture. We're talking, you know, close to $100 million when it's all said and done. And the length of time and work it's going to take and getting people sort of pulling an oar to get this done. But this group has done a wonderful job. And so is the consultants. And I think you've got the foundation to pull this off. Whether I'll ever swim in the pool or not, we'll see. But congratulations.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks for your contributions. Chris, I think you're one of the ones on the name call.
Calling me out, man. Brutal. No, I mean, everything's been said. I mean, it was a great experience. Thank you all for your for the efforts and the time. And out of nowhere, I had a daughter join the high school dive team this year. So suddenly I'm more interested in aquatic centers. So should be fun to see where this goes. I probably won't hit it before she graduates, but for the next generation will be good. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I think, did I miss anyone? I think that's everyone.
No, this is Mark personally. I'm on the phone, couldn't raise my hand. I just want to say, I think the work that has been done over Zoom is amazing. And as we move forward, it's going to get so much easier when we can have some in-person meetings.
Yep. Thank you, Mark. I agree with that. Well, I think that's everyone. I just want to say that it's been a pleasure for me working on this with everyone as well. And I look forward to moving this forward and getting it updated and sent over to the city councils and taking that next step here with everyone. Matthew.
Just finally for me, again, for everyone on the call, you've been fantastic, very thoughtful and engaging. Thank you. I'd also like to say you can all be very, very proud of your city staff, the core planning group, Dave Johnson, Ethan, Matthew, all the other staff members that have contributed there. Really, really exceptional in their commitment to this, their commitment to doing it right, to keep drilling, keep mining until we really had the right critical mass of information, all in the midst of these pandemic challenges. They were just phenomenal to work with, and commit a great amount of the work in this report to all of them. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. Ken or Matthew, maybe we'll start with Ken and then Matthew, you can close us out.
Well, I think everything's pretty much been said, but I would agree. I mean, it's been a long process, certainly, and it was elongated out by COVID. But you know, here we are, and in the end, I think hopefully what we've delivered and what you all have reacted to is what the community wants to see moving forward. And again, it's been exciting to work on this, and looking forward to the next steps moving forward. But thanks for everybody's time in this effort, and glad we've gotten this at least to this first finish line.
Yep. All right, Matthew, your turn.
Well, what a love fest tonight. We will not lose sight of the work ahead, but I appreciate the love fest because I think it's a discovery of some real capacity of how to conquer big challenges and how to actually think beyond maybe some of our limitations that we think we have. So those of you who said you're hopeful and excited, I think there's also pride here and discovering who we are. I'm outside of the community. I can't really take ownership of that, but I can tell you that I'm witnessing kind of an evolution and a growth that I just think needs, nobody wants a plan to sit on the shelf, but this is documentation of citizens working together and really thinking things through with a lot of professional guidance that we highly value. So on behalf of Ethan and Dave, who couldn't be with us tonight, I just want to say that I can't think of being part of something more, I don't want to use the word inspiring, but aspirational, that tied to reality, like, wait a minute, we're really talking about something we could do together, and we could never have gotten there without each of you contributing as you have. Thank you for that. Please document this experience like you've talked about, being ambassadors and talking about the hard lessons that go into funding, because we've got some hard choices ahead. But I think given this strategy to go to our city councils, we will be just watching leadership develop. It may come from some of you and also from our councils. Our cities seem to have a tradition of public leadership, meaning elected officials have to put a ballot measure forward. It doesn't have to always be that way, but that's a reality check. It's time for us to go to our city councils. Thanks for the love, Festic, because it's real, because it affirms a loving community.
Thanks, Matthew. And with that, I think everyone's had their chance. I want to say thank you again, and we'll be moving this forward to the city councils. And if you do have additional comments in the report, as Brock brought up earlier, please get those to us here by Monday, and probably copy Matthew in the larger group just so we can make sure everyone's aware of those comments so that everyone can weigh in on them. And on that, we'll end the meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
By a 3-hour trip.